He was a homeless black teenager living under a bridge, dreaming only of warmth and a piece of bread. One cold, rainy night, he helped a stranger fix his bike, never guessing who that man really was. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching this video from. The wind carried a taste of rust and rain through the sleeping city, rattling loose pieces of tin and whispering down the narrow alleys where no one lingered after dark. Beneath the old railway bridge, in the echoing chamber of dripping concrete and flickering streetlight, a boy lay curled inside a blanket so thin it was nearly transparent. His name was Jamal, 15 years old, though his eyes held the weariness of someone twice that. The blanket could not keep out the cold, but he kept it pulled to his chin as if it could still pretend to be warmth. Around him were the remnants of another day, an empty paper cup, a few rusted tools, and a battered red toolbox that had belonged to his father. The city moved above him like a different planet. He could hear it, the hum of engines, the clatter of trains, the faraway sirens that rose and fell like a song he didn't belong to. The bridge was his ceiling, the street his floor, and the hollow beneath it his home. When he was lucky, he found food behind the diner 3 blocks away. When he wasn't, he tightened his stomach and told himself a morning would come soon. He had stopped counting the months since his mother died. Pneumonia, they said, and the clinic did what it could, but there was never enough of anything for people like them. His father had been arrested a few weeks later after a fight at the factory. The world collapsed quickly after that. The apartment vanished, the few relatives who might have helped stopped answering, and Jamal learned what it meant to disappear without dying. Yet even in the concrete silence under the bridge, he couldn't stop fixing things. He found broken radios, bent bicycle frames, dead flashlights. He would clean them, turn screws with the patience of a craftsman, and sometimes bring one back to life. It was a small, stubborn magic, the one piece of himself he could still control. That night, the rain had turned heavier, drumming against the steel beams like fingers on a drum. Jamal sat up, rubbing his hands together, trying to coax blood into his fingertips. He was thinking of his mother's voice, the way she used to hum while cooking, when a sound cut through the storm, the low, guttural growl of a motorcycle engine. It came from the road above, then echoed down into the underpass. It sputtered, coughed, and finally went silent. He froze, listening. Few people ever came here. The bridge hid more shadows than street lamps, and the few who wandered in were rarely the kind who offered comfort. The sound came again, the clank of metal, a curse, a voice that carried exhaustion. Jamal crawled to the edge of the concrete wall and peered out. A massive black Harley stood under the far arch of the bridge, its chrome dulled by rain. Beside it, a man in a heavy leather vest kicked the tire in frustration. He was tall and broad, with arms like tree trunks and tattoos that disappeared into the sleeves of his shirt. Even in the dim light, Jamal could see a streak of blood running down his leg. The man muttered under his breath, fumbling with his phone, then shoving it back into his pocket. Jamal hesitated. He knew better than to get close to strangers, especially ones like this. Bikers had their own kind of power in the city, loud, wild, untouchable. He was invisible, and invisibility had kept him alive. Still, something in the man's voice, the pain in it, the fatigue pulled at him. His mother's words echoed inside him like a whisper carried by the wind. If you can help, even when you have nothing, you'll always be richer than those who have everything but no heart. He stood slowly, clutching his blanket around his shoulders, and stepped out into the rain. The water soaked through his sneakers in seconds. He walked toward the stranger, every step heavy with doubt. The man turned sharply when he heard the footsteps. "Who's there?" the biker barked. Jamal flinched but kept walking. "It's just me," he said, voice small but steady. "I heard your bike. You need help?" The man stared at him, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "Kid, what are you doing out here? Go home." "This is my home," Jamal said quietly. He pointed to the tire. "It's flat. I can fix it." The biker looked down at the wheel, then back at the boy. Rain ran down his face, mixing with the blood from his leg. You think you can fix a Harley with, what, that blanket?" Jamal dropped the blanket and crouched beside the bike. "I've got tool," he said, pulling the red box closer. Inside were a handful of wrenches, a screwdriver with a cracked handle, and a piece of wire he used for almost everything. Just need a few minutes. The man hesitated. The storm was getting worse, and his options were few. Finally, he sighed and stepped aside. Fine, knock yourself out. Jamal knelt in the puddles, his breath misting in the air. He ran his fingers over the rubber, checking for the leak. The cut was clean, a small tear near the valve. Got a patch? He asked. The biker grunted. You think I ride around carrying patches? Guess not. Jamal pulled a strip of rubber from his box, a piece of an old inner tube he'd kept just in case. With quick, practiced hands, he used a bit of adhesive and pressed it into place, then wrapped the area tight with black tape. He worked fast but precise, his hands trembling from the cold but never slipping. The man watched in silence. His leg throbbed where he'd fallen earlier on the slick road, but he couldn't look away from the boy. There was something haunting about the focus in those eyes. Like this act of fixing something broken was the only thing holding him together. When Jamal was done, he stood up and wiped his hands on his jeans. Try it now, he said. The man kicked the starter. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life, a deep growl filling the underpass. For a moment, even the rain seemed to pause. Jamal smiled faintly. Told you. The biker looked at him, still disbelieving. You did that with junk. I fix stuff. Jamal shrugged. It's what I do. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. Here, you earned it. Jamal shook his head. Keep it. You need gas. The man frowned. Kid, you freezing out here. Take the damn money. I don't want it, Jamal insisted. Just get where you're going safe, okay? He turned to leave, but the man caught his arm, not roughly, just enough to stop him. What's your name? Jamal. The man nodded slowly. Mine's Ray. You got somewhere to go? Jamal's answer was a small shake of the head. Nowhere. Ray's eyes softened, just a flicker, before he let go. You did good tonight, Jamal. You got a steady hand. Don't lose that. Then he mounted his bike, the engine thundering beneath him. He gave the boy one last look through the rain and nodded. Keep your head up, kid. Jamal stood there as the sound of the Harley faded into the night, leaving only the hiss of rain and the hum of the freeway above. He picked up his blanket and toolbox, returned to his corner under the bridge, and sat down. The cold crept back in, but there was a strange warmth in his chest, something small but alive. He pulled the blanket tight again and closed his eyes. The city was still cruel, the world still heavy, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel entirely invisible. Somewhere out there, someone had spoken his name, not to mock him, not to arrest him, but to remember him. As he drifted toward sleep, the last thing he heard was the echo of the motorcycle's roar fading into the distance. He smiled faintly, not knowing that by morning the sound of engines would return, this time not for escape, but for him. When dawn came, it found Jamal still half asleep beneath the bridge, his body stiff from the cold, and his thoughts looping back to the man on the motorcycle. The rain had stopped sometime after midnight, leaving the air damp and metallic. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. The sound of that engine starting again was still fresh in his mind, the roar that had cut through the storm, alive because of his hands. For a fleeting moment, he felt like he had mattered. Then he looked around at the crumbling concrete, the trash scattered in the puddles, and the feeling slipped away like the last trace of warmth. That morning passed in silence. He gathered a few bottles to sell at the recycling center, then returned under the bridge before noon. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and gasoline from the road above. He was trying to repair a broken flashlight when he heard it again, the sound of a motorcycle, low and heavy, coming closer. He froze, heart racing. The echo grew louder until the familiar black Harley appeared, rolling slowly down the slope toward him. Ray killed the engine and dismounted with a grimace, favoring his injured leg. His jeans were torn where the blood had dried. He was carrying a small paper bag that steamed faintly in the cold. Jamal rose to his feet, uncertain whether to run or speak. "Morning, kid," Ray said, his voice rough but calm. "You still here?" Jamal hesitated, then nodded. Didn't have anywhere else to go. Ray held out the paper bag. "Got you something. Coffee and a sandwich. Figured you could use it." For a second, Jamal just stared. No one had given him food in months without expecting something back. He reached out slowly, his fingers trembling. Why? Ray shrugged. Because you helped me last night, and because I was raised better than to forget that. The coffee was bitter and burned his tongue, but to Jamal it tasted like kindness. They sat in silence for a while. Above them, cars thundered by. Ray pulled out a pack of cigarettes and lit one, watching the smoke rise toward the beams. You know, he said after a moment, most folks would have walked past me last night, but you didn't. You patched my leg, fixed my tire, and refused money. What's your story, kid? Jamal looked down at his hands. Ain't much of a story. My mom got sick last winter. Couldn't afford the hospital. My dad, he's in prison. Been on my own since. Ray exhaled smoke slowly, his eyes narrowing. How old are you? 15. Jesus, Ray muttered. 15. When I was your age, I thought the world owed me something. Guess I was wrong about that. He looked at the boy again, studying the hollow cheeks and the faint stubbornness in his jaw. You remind me of me when I was stupid enough to think no one gave a damn. Jamal's voice was quiet. People don't. Not really. Some do, Ray said. They just get buried under the noise. A gust of wind swept through, sending water dripping from the bridge above. Jamal shivered, pulling the blanket tighter. Ray looked at the makeshift shelter, a corner lined with cardboard and a few plastic bags inside. This is no place for a kid. It's what I got. Ray crouched, wincing at the pull in his leg. He pointed at the red toolbox. That yours? Yeah, my dad's. He was a mechanic. Taught me a few things before. Jamal's voice trailed off. Guess it's the only thing I got left from him. Ray nodded, tapping ash onto the wet concrete. You've got good hands. You knew exactly where that leak was last night. Most mechanics would have taken longer. I've had practice. People throw things away when they stop working. I like fixing them. Makes me feel like maybe not everything has to stay broken. The line hung in the air. Ray looked at him for a long time before saying softly, That's one hell of a thing to understand at your age. The rain started again, thin at first and then steady. Ray stood, limping slightly, and said, Listen, I gotta ride out, but I'll be back around. You stay alive till then, yeah? Jamal nodded, unsure whether to believe him. You don't have to. I know, Ray said, pulling his gloves back on. That's why I will. He started the Harley, the roar filling the space beneath the bridge like a heartbeat. Jamal watched as the red tail light disappeared into the curtain of rain. That night the wind howled through the cracks again, but Jamal's mind wouldn't rest. He replayed every word, every sound, wondering why a man like that would care enough to return. By the time sleep finally took him, his hands were still wrapped around the empty coffee cup, holding on to the only warmth the day had given him. When morning came, the air was sharp with frost. He went through his routine, checked the toolbox, folded his blanket, counted the few coins in his pocket. The sun climbed over the skyline, pale and weak, and for a moment he let himself believe Ray might actually come back. But as the day stretched on, the highway noise faded into the same endless rhythm. Then as dusk settled, the hum of engines broke through again, but not one this time. Several, deep, synchronized, and powerful. Jamal's heart stuttered. The sound rolled closer, echoing under the bridge like thunder. He stood, his body tense, eyes wide. He thought of the night before, of the kindness that had felt too fragile to be real. He didn't yet understand that sometimes fate keeps its promises in ways that feel like storms. The echo came first, rolling through the hollow of the underpass like a distant storm. Jamal stirred from his sleep, half believing he was dreaming, until the vibration of engines became too real, too heavy. He sat up sharply, heart pounding, clutching his blanket. The sound grew louder with every passing second, a chorus of deep mechanical thunder that made the very concrete around him tremble. He crawled toward the edge of the shadows, eyes straining through the gray morning light. What he saw made his breath catch. Motorcycles, dozens of them. Their headlights cut through the fog like white fire, reflecting off wet asphalt and steel columns. They came in a line, one after another, until the entire street above the bridge seemed to roar. The noise sank into his chest, a living thing. Then one by one, the bikes turned down the ramp, descending toward the place where he stood frozen. By the time the first rider rolled to a stop, Jamal counted more than 100. The air filled with the smell of gasoline, leather, and cold iron. The insignia stitched on their vests caught the light, two coiled serpents wrapped around a chrome wheel. Iron serpents, the same patch Ray had worn. Panic hit him before reason did. His first thought was that he had done something wrong, that maybe Ray had lied about being grateful, that maybe this was payback for touching something he shouldn't have. He stumbled backward, his heel slipping in a puddle. The bridge that had always been his refuge suddenly felt like a trap, and he was the prey. One of the bikes pulled ahead of the others and stopped right in front of him. The rider killed the engine. For a moment, all Jamal could hear was the sound of the rain dripping from the girders above. The man removed his helmet, and there was Ray, his face serious but not angry. The faint scar on his cheek caught the light as he walked toward the boy. Jamal's voice came out in a whisper. "Ray, what's happening?" Ray didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned and raised his hand. In an instant, every engine behind him went silent. The sudden quiet was deafening after so much thunder. The only sound left was the hum of the city above and the wind sighing through the cracks in the concrete. Ray faced the crowd of bikers, his voice carrying with authority. "This kid," he said, pointing at Jamal, "is the reason I'm standing here today. Last night, under this bridge, when I was bleeding and broken, when I thought the world had turned its back, he helped me. Didn't ask who I was, didn't ask for a thing. Fixed my bike, patched me up, and gave me his last damn bit of kindness." He turned back to Jamal. "You gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost." The group murmured, low and reverent. Jamal's throat tightened. He wanted to tell them it wasn't a big deal, that he just did what anyone would do. But looking at the rows of hard, scarred faces, he knew not everyone would have. Ray motioned to someone behind him. Another biker stepped forward, a broad man with a gray beard and gentle eyes. He was carrying a heavy leather jacket, black with the same serpent emblem stitched on the back. Without a word, he draped it over Jamal's shoulders. The weight of it startled him. It was warm, solid, and smelled faintly of oil and rain. Another man set a bag at his feet. Inside were food, gloves, socks, and a pair of boots that looked almost new. Then came another biker, placing an envelope in Jamal's hand. It was thick, filled with cash. He stared at it as if it might disappear. Ray knelt slightly, looking him straight in the eyes. "You said last night this place was your home. Not anymore." He pressed something cold into Jamal's palm, a set of keys attached to a small metal tag with a number etched into it. "There's a garage 3 blocks from here, old storage unit I own. It's dry, has heat, and a lock. It's yours now." Jamal blinked, stunned into silence. I don't understand." Ray smiled faintly, the hard lines of his face softening. "Don't need to. You helped me when you had nothing. That's what family means in our world. You just didn't know you had one." One by one, the bikers began to move. Some clapped Jamal on the shoulder, others nodded in silent respect. Their gestures were small but carried more weight than words. He looked at each of them, men and women with weathered faces, scars, and heavy boots, and realized they weren't just dangerous strangers. They were people who'd built their own kind of brotherhood out of loyalty, pain, and protection. And somehow he was standing among them. Ray stood tall again, raising his voice to the group. "No one here forgets what this kid did. We live by the road, and the road can be cruel. But tonight, it gave us a reminder kindness still exists, even under bridges, even in the cold." The crowd responded with a deep rumble of approval. A few engines revved softly, like a salute. Jamal felt the tears sting his eyes, hot against the chill air. He turned away for a second, trying to hide it, but Ray caught his shoulder. "Hey," Ray said gently, "you don't gotta hide that. We've all bled before. You've done more than most grown men I know." Jamal swallowed hard. "I just didn't think anyone would care." "Well, now you know better." Ray's grin was small but real. "We take care of our own." The sound of engines roared back to life, one after another, a symphony of metal and power that shook the ground. People from nearby streets had gathered, drawn by the noise pedestrians, a few workers, even a bus driver who stopped to watch. They saw the sight of over 100 bikers surrounding a skinny boy in an oversized jacket and stood speechless. Ray climbed back onto his Harley, but didn't start it yet. He looked at Jamal once more and said, "You're not alone anymore. Tomorrow morning, come to the garage. You'll find me there. We've got work to do." And with that, he twisted the throttle. The bikes moved in unison, an army of chrome and thunder rising back into the city. The echo followed them for a long time after they were gone, bouncing off the wet walls like the beating of a distant heart. Jamal stood there, his breath fogging in the cold. Around him lay the things they had left, the food, the jacket, the envelope, and the keys gleaming faintly under the streetlight. He dropped to his knees, unable to hold back the tears anymore. For the first time in what felt like forever, they weren't from pain or hunger. They were from something else, something strange and full, and almost too big for his chest. The night crept back into silence, but it wasn't the same silence as before. There was warmth in it now and promise. Jamal pulled the jacket tighter, its weight both grounding and comforting, and whispered into the darkness, "Thank you." Above him, the freeway hummed like a lullaby, and for the first time since his mother's death, he let himself believe that maybe the world hadn't forgotten him after all. The following morning came gray and cold, with a pale light stretching weakly across the city skyline. Jamal woke early, the sounds of passing cars and dripping water echoing around him, though something inside felt different now. He sat up beneath the bridge, still wrapped in the heavy leather jacket that hung loose on his thin shoulders. Its weight reminded him that last night had not been a dream. The food bag and the envelope lay beside him where he had left them, and in his hand, he still held the small set of keys Ray had pressed into his palm. He stared at them for a long time before finally standing. The rain had stopped, but puddles still reflected the overcast sky like dull glass. The chill bit at his fingers, but the memory of that wall of roaring engines made it easier to bear. For the first time in a long while, he had somewhere to go. The walk took him through streets he knew too well, cracked sidewalks, shuttered shops, the smell of old oil and smoke drifting from the auto lots nearby. When he reached the address etched into the small metal tag, he stopped. In front of him stood a large weathered building with a faded sign above the door. Iron Serpent's Garage. The paint was peeling, the metal shutters rusted in spots, but through the open side bay came the sound of a wrench clinking against steel and the familiar hum of a running motor. Jamal hesitated, fingers tightening on the keys. Part of him wondered if it had all been some kind of elaborate joke. But then a voice broke through the noise, deep and familiar. "Knew you'd show up, kid." Ray appeared from behind a motorcycle, wiping his hands on a rag. His beard was streaked with gray, and his expression, though hard-edged as always, carried something close to warmth. "Took you long enough," he said. Jamal shifted awkwardly. "I didn't know if you meant it." Ray tossed the rag aside. "You'll learn quick, Jamal. Around here we don't say things we don't mean." He gestured toward the garage. "Come on in. Time you met the rest of the crew." Inside, the air smelled of oil, metal, and burnt rubber. Tools lined the walls, some gleaming, some older than Jamal himself. A dozen bikes were in various states of repair, and 3 men worked quietly nearby, one welding, another adjusting a carburetor, the third sweeping up scraps of metal. They all looked up when Jamal entered. "This the kid you were talking about?" asked one, a heavy-set man with tattooed arms. Ray nodded. "Yeah, Jamal, the one who fixed my bike in the rain." The man grinned, showing a gold tooth. "Got guts, I'll give him that." Another man, older, with a scar over his eye, added, "In steady hands if he kept that Harley from dying on the road." Jamal didn't know what to say. He felt the same nervousness as when he had first spoken to Ray under the bridge. But this time it was mixed with something else. Anticipation. Ray pointed to a small corner near the back of the shop. "That's yours, there's a cot and a heater." "Not much, but it's dry. You keep it clean, you earn your stay." Jamal ran his fingers over the cot's thin blanket and nodded. "I can do that." "Good," Ray said. "Then let's see what those hands can do in daylight." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of work. Jamal fetched tools, tightened bolts, and learned how to disassemble and reassemble parts he'd only ever seen in pieces before. Ray watched closely, correcting him when needed, but never scolding. By the end of the day, Jamal's fingers were black with grease, but his heart was lighter than it had been in years. Later, when the garage lights dimmed and the men gathered around an old radio, Ray handed him a sandwich and a bottle of water. "You did good," he said. Jamal smiled faintly. "Feels better than scavenging trash." "That's because this ain't trash," Ray replied. "Everything here's got a story. Every bike, every dent, every scratch. Same with people." He leaned back on a stool, staring at the ceiling. "You fix what's broken long enough, you start fixing yourself too." The words stayed with Jamal. Over the next few weeks, the garage became his world. He woke early each morning to the clang of metal, the hiss of air compressors, the hum of engines that sounded like living hearts. The Iron Serpents treated him with a rough sort of affection, joking, teaching, sometimes shouting, but always including him. They started calling him Kid Wrench, a name that made him grin every time. For the first time since his mother's death, Jamal felt seen. He learned how to repair brakes, tune carburetors, and identify problems just by listening to an engine's tone. Ray became something between a boss and a father figure, patient but demanding. One cold afternoon, while Jamal worked on a worn-out bike near the entrance, a black SUV pulled up. A man in a city jacket stepped out, holding a clipboard. He was clean-cut, his shoes too shiny for a place like this. Ray noticed him immediately and frowned. "Help you?" he asked. The man flipped through his papers. "Raymond Carson, I'm with the city zoning department. I'm here to inform you that this property is being reevaluated for redevelopment. There's a proposed project for commercial use." Ray's jaw tightened. "Meaning?" "Meaning this building and several others in this area are slated for demolition within the next 3 months," the man said matter-of-factly. "You'll receive official notice soon." Jamal froze where he stood. The garage, his safe place, suddenly felt fragile again. When the man left, Ray slammed his wrench down on the workbench hard enough to make the tools rattle. The others said nothing. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier. Jamal stepped forward. "What's going to happen?" Ray looked at him, anger flickering beneath his calm exterior. "What always happens, kid? The city doesn't give a damn about people like us. They want our space, they'll take it. Doesn't matter what this place means." Jamal clenched his fists. "But this garage, it saved me. It saves others too." Ray gave a tired smile. "Yeah, but saving people doesn't count for much in paperwork." That night, long after the others had gone home, Jamal sat alone by the cot, staring at the walls. The garage that had felt so indestructible now seemed just another thing the world could take away. But the thought of returning to the bridge filled him with quiet rage. He couldn't lose this. Not after everything. The heater clicked softly beside him, its orange light flickering across the floor. He thought of the engines, the laughter, the hands that had reached out to him when no one else did. Something inside him hardened, a determination, new and unfamiliar. He whispered into the dark, "They won't take this away. Not again." Above the city, the night hummed with wind, and the sound reminded him faintly of thunder. It was the same kind that had shaken the bridge weeks before. Only this time, it wasn't fear it brought, but resolve. The next few days passed in uneasy silence. The news of the city's decision hung over the garage like a storm cloud ready to break. The Iron Serpents went about their work as usual, but the usual jokes and laughter were gone, replaced by tight faces and forced focus. Jamal felt it every time he picked up a wrench. The hum of the place that had once been alive now buzzed with frustration and fear. Ray said little, but his silence spoke volumes. He'd built this place with his own hands years ago, long before Jamal was even born. And now men with clipboards and suits were threatening to erase it all. One evening after the others had gone home, Jamal found Ray sitting alone at the back of the garage, a half-empty bottle beside him and an old record spinning quietly on a turntable. The bluesy hum of a guitar filled the air, soft and mournful. Jamal hesitated before walking closer. "They really gonna tear it down?" he asked. Ray didn't look up. "City's already got the papers drafted. They want this whole block turned into a damn shopping complex. Condos, offices, all shiny and soulless. People like us don't fit in their plans. There has to be a way to stop them, Jamal said. We could talk to someone, maybe a lawyer? Ray let out a dry laugh. You think lawyers work for free, kid? This world runs on money, not justice. He rubbed a hand across his beard, his eyes shadowed. You can't fight City Hall. Jamal looked around the garage. The grease-stained floor, the smell of oil and sweat, the half-built bikes that gleamed in the dim light. He thought of the nights he'd fallen asleep listening to the sound of tools, of the mornings filled with laughter and engines roaring to life. It wasn't just a building to him. It was the first place he'd ever felt like he belonged. He sat beside Ray, quiet for a long moment, then said softly, You once told me that fixing things helps fix yourself. Maybe this is just another thing that's broken. Maybe we can fix it too. Ray looked at him, the faintest spark of pride flickering through the weariness. You don't give up easy, do you? Jamal shook his head. Not anymore. The idea began to take shape that night. Jamal knew the world didn't care about forgotten places or people, but he also knew that stories mattered, and if he could tell theirs loud enough, maybe someone would listen. He borrowed one of the Serpent's old laptops and spent hours learning how to post online. He wrote about the garage, about Ray and the men who had taken him in, about how this place had turned a homeless boy into someone with purpose. He posted photos of the bikes, the mural painted on the back wall, the faces of the people who had found something like family here. He called it the Garage of Hope, and at the end he wrote, If the city tears this place down, they're not just destroying a building, they're taking away a second chance for people like me. By morning, the post had already begun to spread. Comments poured in from strangers across the city, some offering donations, others sharing their own stories of lost homes, lost families, lost hope. The attention grew faster than Jamal had imagined. Local bloggers picked it up, then a small community paper, and within days a local news channel reached out asking for an interview. Ray was furious at first when reporters showed up at the garage, but when he saw the way people's eyes softened listening to Jamal speak, his anger faded. Standing in front of the camera, Jamal told the story of the boy who once slept under a bridge and the bikers who gave him a place to call home. His voice trembled, but he didn't stop. They taught me that family isn't blood. It's who stands beside you when the world turns its back. This garage isn't just a shop. It's proof that kindness still builds things worth saving. The broadcast aired that night, and by morning, donations flooded in. People sent money, tools, even handwritten letters of support. Volunteers came to help repair the building, painting walls, fixing wiring, cleaning the yard. What had started as a fight to save a garage had become something much bigger, a symbol of resistance, of second chances. But the city officials didn't back down easily. One afternoon, a group of them arrived with new paperwork and a notice pinned to the door. Eviction effective within 30 days. Ray tore it down, his temper breaking. You can't take what you don't understand, he growled. Jamal stood beside him, gripping the notice tightly. His voice was quiet but steady. We're not done yet. He went back online, this time calling for signatures, urging people to petition against the demolition. The story of the Iron Serpent's garage spread beyond the city. Bigger outlets picked it up. A national newspaper ran an article titled, The Boy Who Fought for His Family of Steel. Overnight, Jamal became the face of the movement. Reporters camped outside and people brought food and blankets for the crew. One morning, Ray found him sitting at the workbench, surrounded by letters and notes. You did this, kid, he said. You turned a death notice into a damn revolution. Jamal smiled tiredly. I just told the truth. Weeks passed and the tension built. City officials scheduled a public hearing. The garage was packed that day. Bikers in leather, locals, volunteers, and news crews crowding the space. When Jamal stood to speak, his hands trembled. But when he looked around and saw Ray's nod, he steadied himself. He spoke not of anger, but of gratitude, of how a cold night and a broken motorcycle had changed two lives, of how kindness had rippled into something no one had expected. When he finished, there was silence, then applause, thunderous and real. The decision came a week later. The city withdrew the demolition order and offered a preservation grant, recognizing the garage as a community repair and mentorship center. It wasn't just saved, it was reborn. The night they got the news, the Iron Serpents gathered around the fire pit behind the shop. Music played from an old radio, and laughter returned to the air. Ray clapped Jamal on the back. "You saved us, kid." Jamal shook his head. "We saved each other." Ray smiled, lifting a worn set of motorcycle keys from his pocket. "There's one more thing." He tossed them to Jamal, who caught them with wide eyes. "Old 85 Harley. She's yours now. You build her back piece by piece. Only fair you ride her." Jamal stared at the bike gleaming under the shop lights, the one he had spent weeks restoring. Painted in matte black, its tank bore a silver engraving. "Never ride alone." As he swung a leg over the seat, the others cheered. The engine roared to life, smooth and powerful. The vibration pulsed through his chest like a heartbeat. For the first time, Jamal didn't feel like he was running from something. He was moving toward it. Under the night sky, surrounded by the people who had become his family, he finally understood what Ray had meant all along. Fixing things wasn't just about metal and bolts. It was about hearts, about hope, about finding light in the darkest corners of the city. And as the sound of engines joined his, the chorus of thunder returned, not as a storm of fear this time, but as a song of triumph. 2 years had passed since the night Jamal first walked into the Iron Serpent's garage, a shivering boy with nothing but a red toolbox and a will to survive. The city had changed in that time. The shiny towers still rose, the traffic still roared. But on the corner of an old industrial block, the sound of engines meant something different now. The garage had grown into a heartbeat of its own. Its doors opened to anyone who needed a chance. Its walls covered with photographs, murals, and stories of lives rebuilt. What once had been a sanctuary for a few bikers had become a home for many. Jamal stood outside one crisp morning, the sun glinting off the chrome of the motorcycles lined up along the curb. He was taller now, stronger, his hands steady and sure as he checked the throttle of a restored bike. His jacket no longer hung loose. It fit him perfectly, worn in all the right places. The Iron Serpent's emblem shining on the back like a badge of belonging. To anyone passing by, he looked like one of them, a man carved by the road. But to Ray, who leaned against the doorframe watching him, he was still the kid who'd crawled out from under a bridge with grease-stained hands and quiet eyes that had seen too much. "You've come a long way, Jamal," Ray said, lighting a cigarette, the smoke curling in the morning air. "You ever think about that night?" Jamal smiled faintly. "Every day. It's the reason I'm here." "Funny thing," Ray mused, "how a busted tire and a kid with a toolbox can change the world." He took a long drag, exhaling slowly. "You've made this place something I never thought it could be." Jamal glanced toward the back lot, where 3 teenagers were working on an old dirt bike. They were kids from the shelter runaways, orphans, kids who reminded him too much of himself. He spent his afternoons teaching them how to handle tools, how to listen to the hum of an engine, how to find focus in the rhythm of turning bolts. The garage was more than just a workshop now. It was a school for second chances. "They just need someone to believe in them," Jamal said quietly, "like you did for me." Ray flicked his cigarette to the ground and crushed it under his boot. "You believe first, kid. You just needed someone to remind you." The days ran smooth after that, each one blending into the next, filled with laughter, work, and the deep, comforting sound of machines coming back to life. The Iron Serpents still rode together, but their reputation had shifted. People no longer saw them as a gang to be feared, but as guardians of their neighborhood, a group that fixed engines for free, hosted charity rides, and gave out food during winter. It wasn't about rebellion anymore. It was about redemption. One evening, after the sun dipped behind the skyline and the city lights flickered on one by one, Jamal finished closing up the garage. The streets were quiet, the air cool with the scent of rain. He looked around the space one last time, at the rows of tools, the mural painted by local kids depicting wings rising from an engine block, and the old Harley parked near the door, the same one he had repaired that first night. He ran a hand along its tank, tracing the engraved words, "Never ride alone." Something stirred inside him then, a pull back to the beginning. He grabbed his helmet, climbed onto the bike, and kicked the engine to life. The sound filled the street like a familiar song. He didn't tell anyone where he was going, Some places called you quietly, and you just knew you had to answer. The road stretched long and dark ahead, wet from an earlier drizzle, the streetlights painting golden streaks on the pavement. He rode through neighborhoods that had once frightened him, past the diner where he used to scavenge leftovers, past the alleys where he'd hidden from the wind. The world looked different now, not kinder, but clearer. Every turn, every sound of the engine reminded him how far he had come. When he reached the old bridge, he slowed and pulled over. The underpass stood just as it had that night. Cracked concrete, faded graffiti, water dripping in rhythmic taps from the beams above. But the darkness didn't feel the same. He parked the bike where the puddles reflected the glow of the city and dismounted, removing his helmet. The air was still, and for a moment, time itself seemed to pause. He walked toward the wall where he had once slept, where fear and hunger had been his only company. The memory rose sharp and clear, the cold biting through the blanket, the rain falling like needles, the sound of that first engine roaring in the distance. He could almost see his younger self curled there, small and invisible, waiting for a kindness he didn't believe would ever come. Jamal reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver wrench, the very first tool he'd used to fix Ray's Harley. It was worn smooth from years of use, but to him, it was priceless. He knelt and placed it gently on the ground where he had once slept. For what was broken, he whispered, and for what was rebuilt. A gust of wind moved through the underpass, carrying with it the faint rumble of engines from somewhere far away. Jamal looked up and his eyes caught the faint glow of something new painted on the wall, a message left by someone from the crew, written in careful strokes of white paint. It read, "Sometimes the heart runs on more than fuel, sometimes it runs on kindness." He smiled, a slow, quiet smile that reached all the way to his chest. The world hadn't grown softer, but he had grown stronger. He turned back to his bike, the leather jacket catching the faint orange light of the street lamp. As he swung a leg over the seat, the city stretched out before him like an open road. When the engine started, its sound filled the space beneath the bridge, echoing off the walls like a living heartbeat. Jamal looked once more at the place that had given him both his lowest moment and his first step toward hope. Then he twisted the throttle. The Harley surged forward, its roar fading into the night as he rode toward the horizon, not away from his past but carrying it with him. Every mile a reminder that even in the darkest corners, light can find its way back. And long after he was gone, the wrench gleamed faintly in the glow of passing headlights, lying beneath the bridge as a quiet promise that kindness, once given, never truly disappears. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll away. Hit subscribe now so you never miss the next one. Watch our other incredible stories of hope and humanity that will leave you speechless. And most importantly, share this video with someone who still believes that a single act of kindness can change everything.